Warren Sinclair, now we're getting ready. You know, Warren Sinclair was the second president of the NCRP, the second president. And even though we've been around since 1929, when we started, Lauriston Taylor was the leader for an innumerable number of years, and then Warren took over, and for many years was one of the also a very effective president. And when he left, he gave us a legacy that keeps on giving. He provided an endowment, if you will, where on the interest we're able to support the Sinclair Lecture, which is a topical, which is a lecture in recognition of Warren Sinclair, and we try to tie it to the theme of the annual meeting. And then just to mention that Warren, 90 years old, just a year or so ago, he passed away in the same year. His wife Joy also passed away, and so we remember them and their wonderful contribution to NCRP, but then as just wonderful individuals. Go to the next slide. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague and advisor, Dr. Richard Toohey. He's been on the board of the directors since 2010, been on the council for over 10 years, then's been critical helping us out, particularly in these times of financial difficulties on our Budget and Finance Committee, co-chair of this year's annual meeting, co-chair of one of our important ongoing initiatives on dosimetry aspects for the million-person study, which is so complex because it includes atomic veterans, nuclear utility workers, industrial radiographers, Department of Energy workers, those that ingest radionuclides, cardiologists, medical oncologists, all these in the million-person study. And this committee that Dick chairs with Andre Bouville is providing oversight on dosimetry. He received a PhD in physics at the University of Cincinnati, president of the Health Physics Society, treasurer of IRPA, the International Radiation Protection Association, formerly worked at Argonne, Oak Ridge Associated Universities, and specializes in internal dosimetry, dose reconstruction, and emergency response, and then is the chair of our ongoing activities in WARP, CC2, on meeting the needs of the nation. So there's Dick's and a few friends, and I don't know how he happens to do this, but he always seems to be in the center of everything, whether it's because of the orange shirt or whatever. He's positioned himself very effectively to be really an effective advisor and a foundation for NCRP and a help for me and for the whole council. So very glad to introduce Dr. Toohey, who will be presenting the Warren Sinclair Lecture, which will be WARP, an NCRP initiative to meet the needs of the nation for radiation protection. Dr. Toohey.
Okay, thank you, John. Actually, if you take a closer look at those photos, you'll notice it is a simple matter of ordering things by height. I'm taller than Andre, I'm shorter than Harold Beck, So that's the way it works. It's not just an honor, but a great pleasure for me to give the Sinclair Lecture. I actually worked for Warren Sinclair. When I was looking for a way to make a living after getting my doctorate in nuclear physics, I had done my research in the physics division at Argonne National Lab on a pre-doc fellowship. And my dissertation was valence component in the threshold photoneutron spectrum of zirconium-91. As I said, I then had to figure out a way to make a living. And pure dumb luck, the Center for Human Radiobiology had been created by the AEC, and yes, I am old enough to have worked for the AEC, and located at Argonne to consolidate studies on the follow-up of the radium dial painters. There had been 3 existing studies, one at Argonne, one by the New Jersey Department of Health, and of course the third by Robley Evans at MIT. And these were placed at Argonne. Of course, they were ramping up. And on the weekly bulletin board listings, they had a position advertised for someone to do whole body counting on these little old ladies. And they had 4 criteria listed. They want someone who was familiar with gamma ray measurements, nuclear instrumentation, computer programming, and physiology. I figured, well, what the hell, 3 out of 4 ain't bad. So fortunately, I got the job mostly because the people running the show, like Bob Rowland, Andy Staney, and John Rendo, had their doctorates in physics, chemistry, whatever, and thought, you know, it's probably easier to hire a physicist and teach him or her physiology than vice versa. I am still not convinced that is true. But the rest is history, so that's how I became a health physicist and an internal dosimetrist in particular. But because of that position, I actually worked for Warren Sinclair. At the time, he was the Associate Laboratory Director for Biomedical and Environmental Research. So he was my boss, albeit 4 rungs removed up the management ladder, but nevertheless, I did work for him. But let me tell you another story, which to me is actually more significant. A number of years ago, when we were still having the annual meetings over in Crystal City, on one of the lunch breaks, I happened to go to one of the places down there and for lunch, and it was pretty crowded, of course, as always, and I'd gotten my food and was looking for a place to sit, and Warren and Joy were sitting there having their lunch, and Warren just, oh, please, come sit with us. So he was not only a brilliant scientist, he was a nice guy. And that is a very wonderful combination to be. So let's go on now into this thing and talk about the WARP initiative. Well, it's kind of back to the future. When we had the workshop 3 years ago, the lead speaker was John Vilforth, and he discussed the Public Health Service fellowship program. And back in the days, the early days of the atomic age, there was clearly going to be a need for radiation protection professionals in this country. So actually the first program was the Atomic Energy Commission Fellowship Program in 1948. Started with 20 students selected by the NRC. That's the National Research Council, not the other one. And 10 worked at Oak Ridge National Lab and 10 at the University of Rochester under Newell Standard. And that included people like Bill Baer and Les Rogers and other legends. And then the Oak Ridge Institute of Nuclear Studies, which was the forerunner of Oak Ridge Associated Universities, took over administration and extended it to 18 universities, mostly in the Southeast, but Notre Dame did sneak in there. I'm not quite sure how. But really coordinated student and faculty research programs at the AEC Manhattan Project facilities in Oak Ridge. And between, as you see, 23 years there, 940 trainees completed that program. So that really created the cadre of health physicists. The public health program ran from 61 to 72, expanded to 35 universities and 1,800 trainees. So that's where we came from. And the question is, who's going to replace us? And actually, I found the details of this. Paul Ziemer gave the presentation at the IRPA Congress in Vienna a while back. So as time went on, and of course the AEC was split into the Energy Research and Development Authority and the NRC, IRTA took that over, and then when they became DOE, it was continued, but by the 1980s, there were only a few students a year being supported. In 1990, DOE's Office of Environment, Safety, and Health started the Applied Health Physics Fellowship Program at 17 universities, which support about 20 students annually. And then the NRC also began a graduate fellowship program, which continues, but really only supports a few students annually, and, like the military, entails a service obligation. You get your degree, but you pay it back in terms of your effort. Well, this potential shortfall is not a new issue. In some case, I think it affects our credibility because we've been crying wolf for quite a while. Dade Muller in '76 with Ralph Eliason predicted a 50% shortfall in the number of health physicists that would be needed by 1981. And then in 1988, the late Ken Mossman and our Taylor lecturer, John Poston, published A Look to the Future and noted that DOE was reporting current shortages and a high potential for shortages by, 83 and 88, 2003, which was 13 years ago. 2001, the Health Physics Society issued its position statement on human capital crisis, which noted it's clear that the current imbalance will worsen and become untenable. Next one. Kevin Nelson noted that when he was president of HPS and chair of the Capital Task Force, there's 4 R's: recruiting, resources, retention, and retirement that you have to deal with when dealing with person power issues. And my opinion is not only have those 4 R's been neglected, they've fallen on very hard times. And meanwhile, as we all know, the use of ionizing radiation, especially in medicine, has increased tremendously. And those of us who have been radiation safety practitioners, as we enter our elderhood, now become radiation protection consumers because of medical therapy. And it's a double whammy. The radiologists and radiation oncologists who will be treating us are our age, and they're retiring out too. So, it's getting very widespread and very complicated. So, NCRP sponsored this WARP initiative with a workshop that was held across the river in '23. And if you look at the photos, I'm not in the middle on this one, John, but it's the usual suspects. And everyone from 4 areas, government agencies, both state and federal, professional societies, academia, and the private sector, presented their thoughts, feelings, and needs with quad charts, which would show what's our mission, what do we do, how do we do it, and what do we need. Now, I've got one from each of these 4 on the slides, and I'm fully aware of the fact you can't read them, but I will just point out what is probably the significant point on these. This was from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. It was presented by Mike Noska, who's here today, and just look at our needs. Impending retirements, program growth, program gaps, we need HPs, and a surge capacity for emergency response. The Health Physics Society, recruitment and retention of full members, identify and develop volunteers for leadership positions, deploy multimedia outreach programs, increase the efficiency of delivery, but we need members to do that. From the, I think Rich Brave presented this on behalf of Health Physics academic programs. Short-term needs, federal funding of student scholarships and fellowship programs, which are never in the administration's proposed budget. We usually, Health Physics Society cannot lobby since we're a 501c3 organization, but we can provide information to members of Congress, and we normally manage to get those programs restored. And finally, I spoke on behalf of my new boss, Mel Chu, do some part-time consulting. Staffing would be nice. How about a long-term stable government policy and funding?
Check this back here.
Oh, okay. And we know that ain't going to happen, but it would be nice. I've got another one, but this is another talk in and of itself. And Nancy Kerner recently asked me to be a speaker at the plenary session in Spokane, and I'll go into some of this later. But it's a problem which you've heard. How do you pay to maintain the bomb squad in between bombings, which are few and far between? Can you direct fund ES&H or keep it as an overhead function in which it competes with research or production dollars? And there's also a difference between a social and economic model, and I'll just discuss this. Right now, it's an economic model. We get paid off of overhead to do our thing and keep the NRC or DOE inspectors or the state authority, keep the wolf away from the door. But in the competition for funding And the priorities for funding, we normally don't do very well. We'd be better off with a social model of funding in which we could somehow get management and funding agencies in a more enlightened position that, hey, yeah, we want you to do world-class research, but we want you to go home safe to your family every night. You know, we're all in this together. An illustration of the difference between these two models is in the book Freakonomics. And they give the example of the difference between a social and an economic contract. Say you get invited to your mother-in-law's house for Thanksgiving dinner. Okay. The right way to do it in a social contract model is after dinner say, oh, that was great, Mom. Why don't you go sit down, relax, we'll clean up and do the dishes. The economic contract model is, that was a great meal, Mom. Here's $20, keep the tip. Which is going to be the more effective approach? And the answer is obvious. So that's one of my dreams. Maybe we could get health physics and all sort of ES&H support working that way. Unfortunately, I'm not optimistic. Now, there are some new data available since we had the workshop, and we'll look at professional society membership, student enrollments, grants, research, and then a major effect on all this, which was the Fukushima Daiichi accident. And most of these themes will be addressed in full by other speakers, so I'm just going to hit a few highlights. Okay, I stole this slide from Jerry Hyatt.
I think it's working. We'll try it next time.
Okay, thanks. And this is nuclear industry employment by age. And the yellow curve was 2003. The red one was 10 years later, 2013. Well, no surprise, the peak has moved to the right. But the real problem, you've got that double hump camel distribution with this minimum in people in their late 30s to late 40s, who would be the likely ones to replace us as we retire out. They're not there. We've got a good incoming group of some very sharp young kids just coming out of school. And when we have the student sessions at the society meeting and our fellowship students here, they're fantastic. But they can't step into a senior management position and run the show yet. They just don't have the hands-on experience. This is the membership of the Health Physics Society. Kathy Pryor will talk more about this, so I won't belabor it, but I do just want to point one thing out. And if I have the pointer here, yes. Okay, this is the full or plenary members of the society. Let's say the professional health physicists. Our other membership categories are students, associate members, who are people interested but not qualified for full membership, and our affiliates. And that's these folks. Notice that within a year, the professional health physicists will be in the minority in our own professional society. That's not encouraging. Next. Same thing is happening in other professional societies, such as radiation research, and Kathy Higley will talk about this a little bit more. Academic funding has always been an issue. As I've said, the fellowship's always never in the administration budget, but we usually manage to get it restored. The DOE low-dose radiation research program was diverted to other uses. Restoration of funding for that program has passed the House, but not the Senate. And of course, in next January, you have to start all over with a new Congress. State funding for university programs is dwindling, and again, this is Kathy Higley's slide. But there are a number of small programs which graduate fewer than 6 students a year, and they're simply not viable in today's university funding climate. And there's only about a dozen available. Okay. And this just shows, some of my colleagues at ORA produce this every year, which is enrollment trends and graduates in health physics and separately in nuclear engineering programs. And it's very clear which way the trend's been going for the last 6 years. But one of the most significant impacts and a lesson learned, and I'll give Charles Miller this. In fact, we shared a cab ride from the airport Saturday and discuss this a bit more. When he spoke at the 2012 annual meeting, I think I'm quoting him correctly. If not, Charles, please correct me, but the idea is there, that the federal government's response to a major radiological accident 8,000 miles away strained our response capabilities to, and in some cases, beyond the breaking point. Okay. Well, how well could we do with a similar accident domestically? Fukushima really kind of derailed the nuclear renaissance, aided and abetted by falling fossil fuel prices. But I don't think that's going to lead to a decreased need for health physicists, because decommissioning and decontamination operations are actually riskier and require more health physics coverage than routine operations. Again, Dick Toohey talking, not NCRP. I do find it a bit amazing and close to what Randy Heyer discussed last night about, people don't make decisions based on science. So even those who are the biggest proponents of having to do something and shut down fossil fuel plants because of global warming are equally opposed to the only large-scale proven source of continuous electric power generation, which is essentially carbon-free. That's the way the world is, and that's the one we live in. But it's not just us. I'm sorry, I'm old enough, I keep calling it the General Accounting Office. No, it's the Government Accountability Office. But 31% of the federal workforce is eligible to retire in a year and 4 months. And within the engineering and technical professional grades, it's even higher. A survey of CRC PD directors, which Ruth McBurney headed up, predict over half of their technical staff can pull the plug over the next 10 years. National Academy of Sciences put out a report, same thing for the future supply of radiochemists. Currently, medical physics looks pretty good in the near term, but with the new training requirements, including clinical residencies for qualified medical physicists, there may not be enough of those slots available to meet future need, especially as the demand for radiation therapy increases with an aging population. The burden on the state regulatory control programs is increasing along with the increased use of radiation in medicine, because they license radiation producing machines, and also if they're agreement states, they license byproduct material. Waste disposal is still an issue. Where are we going to put all this stuff? And spent fuel still needs to go somewhere. One of my former graduate students is making a very tidy living now working for Holtec and selling spent fuel storage units to assorted nuclear power plants. But eventually it still needs to go somewhere, and we don't seem to be making any progress on that. Like myself, many of us who retire from our regular jobs immediately turn around and become consultants. I signed out of ORAL and Human Resources at 12:30 on Friday, March 30th, 2012. Certain fondness in my heart for that occasion, I suppose. At 1 o'clock, I was on a conference call with Mel Chu as a consultant. So like many of us, I had breakfast with Don Poole this morning. He retired from NRC, and on Friday, Monday, he was working for EPRI. So we're seriously flunking retirement. But when it comes to federal functions, especially in emergency response or regulatory issues, those functions must be performed by federal employees. They cannot be outsourced and performed by contractors. Research support is another issue. It's a double-edged sword. If we're going to have faculty to teach future generations of health physics students, they need to have research support to get tenure, or they aren't going to be there. And especially in the smaller programs where you only have 1 or 2 faculty members, if one retires, is the administration likely to replace him or her? As John Rondo used to say, not bloody likely. I've had some conversations with Brett Burke about the future of the Health Physics Society. He maintains professional societies are an 18th century model trying to recruit millennials. Well, what we do, we go to meetings, we sit and listen to papers, we meet our colleagues, we have nice dinner, we read the journal. Kids don't do that. Why should they read a journal when it's all online? Why do they need to travel, when they can look at streaming videos? They're in instant contact with all their friends all over the world on their hips. So it's sort of passed us by. I do kind of enjoy the atmosphere here and meeting friends, but let's face it, kind of like Isaac Newton sitting at a meeting of the Royal Society in London. It hasn't changed that much. There's a big emphasis, as you probably know, in Congress and the administration on STEM initiatives, science, technology, engineering, and math. Some people throw another M in there for medicine. We need to train more people. Well, within that context, you hardly ever hear about the radiological sciences, and I think that's one lobbying effort we need to make. And a lot of the uses of radioactive materials or radiation-producing machines in these other scientific disciplines depends on the radiation protection people to manage it. And again, this is Dick Toohey speaking, there is no public understanding of radiation. Full stop, end of discussion. But some more issues are emerging a little further down the road, but significant. T-norm and fossil fuel production. Now this is another case of deja vu all over again. This issue first hit in the 70s with radium-containing pipe scale on Gulf Coast rigs. And one of Toohey's laws of health physics, which is Murphy was an optimist, the story broke when this used pipe was donated to municipalities to build playground equipment. Another aspect of that same story, a while back, when I was still working at ORAL, went to Connecticut Yankee, I guess, to help them as they were moving into D&D stages. And it turns out that they had had a program for a while when they had built a new facility or something that some of the spoil, the dirt from that, the employees could take home, use it for garden conditioning and all that. So, and the municipality took some of it, used it for backfill. So here's the question. Where this stuff had been gathered by the municipality and put in downtown, what facility was built on top of it? You're right, a kindergarten. So, if we lose control of this stuff, it's going to show up in the worst possible place for public concern. One of those laws. Another issue, and NRC is working, actually getting some funding from NASA to look at this, radiation risks to astronauts beyond low Earth orbit, like the Mars mission. And the concern is with what they call HZE, high atomic number, high energy particles. And we don't have a good handle on what the biological effects of those are. There are some indications, can accelerate aging of neurons in the brain, low loss of mental capacity. And, do you really want an astronaut on a 3-year round-trip mission, not being as good a pilot as they were on the way out when they're coming back? Radiological emergency response is a major issue. John already mentioned that, but some of the things we need, and what Charles has said, we don't have the people to do, rapid exposure screening. If a lot of people are exposed, how do we separate them out into those who may need further examination and possibly medical treatment, and those who don't? Radiation countermeasures are in development. We all know potassium iodide is the anti-radiation pill, and you can buy it on eBay. But what most people don't know is it only works against, 1 or 2 isotopes. So, community resilience is a developing issue. How do people recover from that? And I'm becoming convinced that although we've been doing stakeholder engagement for many years, it's transitioning into stakeholder empowerment, where the stakeholders do not merely supply input to the decision makers, they become the decision makers. And we've seen strong indications and actually implementation of this both in Fukushima and more so in Chernobyl. And it makes a big difference in public acceptance because you're empowering them. They make the decisions. They have the responsibility. It's their choice. It's not something that a regulatory agency or a high-paid consultant is imposing on them. And as Randy told us last night, that doesn't work. But we also have to manage competing risks. One of the other lessons of Fukushima was that we evacuated many tens of thousands of people to avoid a dose of 20 millisieverts, which at 5% per sievert confers a 1/10 of 1% risk of future cancer. 2%, okay, thank you. Oh, 2 minutes. Oh, okay, I thought 2%. I was wondering, how could I get that wrong? Okay, well, we're getting close here, fortunately. But my public health colleagues tell me when you evacuate a population, you have about a 1% mortality risk, especially on the elderly and infirm people. And that's exactly what happened in Fukushima. Depending on which paper you read, there may have been 1,200 premature deaths caused by loss of continuity in care because of the evacuation. So in order to avert a risk of 1/10 of a percent, we confer a risk of 1%. Yeah, got to work on things like that. Okay, so what do we do? Well, nuclear power industry is essentially growing their own. They've developed the uniform curriculum program, training techs at 2-year colleges, and in many cases agreements with 4-year universities for them to go on and get a bachelor's degree. A lot of people use the military to civilian transition pipeline. Last time I saw Chad Mitchell, he was in his whites. Now he's in a business suit. What else can we do? We recommend a joint program support office in the Office of Personnel Management to coordinate recruiting and career management of RP professionals throughout the civil service. It would centralize it, make it more visible, able to monitor staffing levels and needs, hopefully enhance interagency collaboration, reduce some stovepipes, and broaden expertise. This is not too different from Public Health Service Commission officers like Mike Noski being assigned to other agencies, like FDA or EPA. Obviously, we need more education. Kathy will be talking about this and the difference between education and training. Kind of interesting, do we really require a CHP for an RSO? Well, it depends on what's on the license. We also need internships, co-op appointments to get people up with the practical knowledge next. And there's a great example of this, which Dan Blumenthal clued me into, is the NNSA Stewardship Science Programs, which share research initiatives through NNSA, students, faculty, the labs, and the community. So we need more of those. Still more to do. Research support, as I said. Personally, I think we need to focus on low-dose and low-dose rate effects, and we need a robust surge capacity. Medical Reserve Corps is a good start, but it's local. If there's widespread problem, they aren't going to be deployable. So this ROS, Radiological Operations Support Specialist program that Homeland Security is working on will help there. Still more? Knowledge capture. We'll hear about that from Dr. Toohey later. We created Council Committee 2 to continue to monitor the situation and come up with some ideas, and showed some of those yesterday, and keep Congress advised. NCRP was chartered to advise the government on issues. Well, this is one we need to stick with. But it's not just us. Similar efforts are underway in Europe. At the RIC conference, Bill Megwood talked about what they did in Europe. They did a very interesting survey of regulatory agencies, and it wasn't just, well, how many people are retiring and where are you going to get the replacements? They also asked the question, well, once you do have a new hire to replace a retiree, how long does it take them to really replace the retiree and be fully functional in that job? And the response was an average of at least 5 years. So having new graduates is a sine qua non, but they don't immediately become senior professionals after hiring. Okay, so I will wrap up with this one. And this is a tribute to our I won't say fearful, fearless leader. On the second day of the workshop, John was unfortunately taken ill with a case of the flu, so he kind of participated from home on the second one, but he did roust himself from his sick bed to sound the alarm gong for the WARP initiative. So I think we can come to the last slide. And thank you for your attention. I will be very glad to answer any questions that are submitted in writing. So.
And now it's my great pleasure to present Dick with a plaque and a Sinclair medal. And I think I'll try to be very brief because we are just running a little bit short, but I thought it would be appropriate because it's so impressive. This was Jerry Bushberg's idea to have, medals to represent our special lecturers. And so, Dick, thanks very much for the marvelous introduction. And now also we have a recognition and a very small honorarium that goes with this. And we'll have Casper's helping us out. That would be, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right?
Actually, I do have to note that this is indeed a momentous occasion. This is the first time in almost 48 years of marriage that I am wearing more bling than my wife.